A gray-colored toy gun. That's all she held when she was brutally raped and drowned. A disturbing tale of two law enforcement officers who took the life of a 14-year-old girl on junior prom night for wielding a toy gun. A story that Asheville, North Carolina will never forget in a long time. This is the story of Emma Caldwell. From the moment she was born, Emma Caldwell was a bright light in the lives of those around her. She had her father's dark curls and her mother's warm smile, a child who filled the lives of those who knew her with so much laughter. But at the age of 4, that light of her world began to fade, literally. It started with little things. She'd trip over toys on the floor that her mother left behind. She struggled to catch the ball her father tossed to her in the backyard. At first, her parents thought she was just clumsy, but then came the headaches, the unbearable pain behind her eyes that would make her cry out at night. After multiple doctor visits, the diagnosis was clear and devastating: a rare degenerative eye disease. The doctors did everything they could, countless surgeries, medications, even experimental treatments, but nothing worked. By the time she turned 5, Emma had lost complete vision in her left eye. Her right eye held on longer, but her vision was cloudy and distorted, making everything look like shadows and fog. Her parents refused to give up hope. They traveled to specialists in different states, spent countless hours researching cures, but nothing reversed the damage. Eventually, they had to accept the truth: Emma would never see the world the way she once had. Despite this, Emma refused to let her blindness define her. She wore thick glasses that barely helped, and though she carried a white cane, she tried not to rely on it too much. She memorized the layout of her house and school, learning to walk her world independently. By the time she entered middle school, Emma had mastered the art of pretending. She was always smiling, always laughing, always eager to help. Her teachers adored her. Her classmates admired her. Even though she couldn't see them clearly, she felt their kindness, and she gave hers in return. "She's so strong," people would say. "So inspiring." But only her parents knew the truth. They saw the nights when she sat alone in her room, staring into nothingness, gripping her glasses like she was hoping for some miracle. They heard the quiet sniffles when she thought no one was listening. Emma never complained, never asked, "Why me?" But they knew. They knew she was hurting. Yet she pushed on. She excelled in school, her smart mind making up for what her eyes could not. She was a top student, always eager to learn, always ready to prove that her blindness didn't make her weak. She even helped other students with their work, her fingers tracing the words on her braille books as she explained concepts to her classmates. Emma was supposed to attend a special needs school after she lost her left eye, but she was doing quite well in her junior high school. Her parents couldn't bear to transfer her. For where she lived, the neighborhood adored her. Even with her limited sight, Emma would offer to help carry groceries, play with younger kids, and volunteer at the local library. She had a gift for making people feel seen, even though she, herself, could barely see. Then junior prom night was announced. Emma had been so excited. Even though she couldn't dance like the other kids, she still wanted to be part of the night, to feel the music, to laugh with her friends. But after that night, she never came home. The next morning, the entire school was thrown into chaos when a janitor found Emma's body floating in the school pool, her glasses shattered at the bottom of the water. The girl who had fought so hard to live had drowned alone in the dark. What do you see when you close your eyes? Darkness? Silence? Or something more terrifying? For Emma Caldwell, the last minutes of her life were filled with pain and darkness. And on the night of April 20th, 2024, in the quiet town of Asheville, North Carolina, that darkness swallowed her completely. The call came in at 6:42 a.m. A janitor, making his early rounds at the school, had walked into the dimly lit indoor pool area and found a body floating on the surface. Clothed in a torn red dress. At first, he thought it was a prank. But then he saw the pale arms, then, the glasses shattered at the bottom of the pool. Emma Caldwell was dead. She had been floating for hours. Her dark curls, once full of life, now fanned out around her like ink in the water. The police arrived quickly and by 9 a.m., the entire town knew. Asheville wasn't the kind of place where things like this happened. Although the crime rate was above average on the national statistics, violent crimes had declined over the past years in North Carolina. And yet, that morning, as the news spread, everything felt different. Everyone couldn't help but stare at the empty desk where Emma should have been. She had been one of the good ones, the kind of person who made you believe in kindness. The girl who, despite barely being able to see, had spent her life helping others. The girl who laughed loudly, who smiled even when she was struggling, who refused to let her blindness define her. Now, she was gone. The school canceled classes for the day. A makeshift memorial was done in her honor. Flowers, candles, handwritten notes. "You didn't deserve this," one of the pupils read. "I hope you can finally see the stars," said another. But no one understood how it had happened. Emma had gone to the junior prom that night. She had been excited. Happy. She had taken photos with her friends, danced, even though she couldn't see the flashing lights properly. She had been alive. And then, somehow, she ended up alone in the school's pool. Asheville police closed down the school for the next few days, but there was little they could do to help. Investigations were ongoing, but they'd hit a brick wall with any leads. Nothing seemed to point anywhere. Emma Caldwell was gone. Her parents, Daniel and Maria Caldwell, had spent the morning calling her phone over and over, thinking maybe she had just fallen asleep at a friend's house. Maybe she had forgotten to text. Maybe she had just been caught up in the excitement of the night. Then, the knock on the door came. Maria screamed first and had a panic attack. Not Emma. Not their Emma. How does a parent grieve for a child who had already lost so much? A child who had fought so hard to live a normal life, only to have it stolen from her in the most senseless way. They didn't have answers. No one did. The town held a vigil that night. Hundreds gathered outside the school, holding candles, whispering prayers. The pool area was locked off, police still investigating, but people stood outside, staring at the walls as if they could somehow rewind time and undo the nightmare. Emma's teachers wept. Her friends held each other, unable to find the right words. Even people who barely knew her felt the weight of her absence. Because it wasn't just about Emma, it was about what her death meant. If someone like Emma Caldwell, someone so good, so innocent, could be taken, then what did that say about the world they lived in? The police were working tirelessly, or so it seemed. Because in a few weeks, it would be revealed that those meant to bring her justice had caused her death. In the weeks that followed, Emma's death became more than just a tragedy, it became a symbol of something bigger. Her story spread beyond Asheville. News stations picked it up, true crime podcasts began speculating. Online, people demanded justice, creating hashtags in her name, #JusticeForEmma, #WhoKilledEmmaCaldwell. Her parents, shattered beyond words, found themselves thrust into a world they never wanted to be part of, interviews, press conferences, vigils. They didn't care about the attention. They just wanted answers. They just wanted their daughter back. But there was no bringing Emma back. The school eventually reopened, but things were never the same. Her seat remained empty. And somewhere, out there, the person who took Emma's life was still walking free. Maybe they thought they had gotten away with it. But the town of Asheville would never forget. Because Emma Caldwell wasn't just a headline. She was a daughter. A friend. A fighter. And her story wasn't over yet. For weeks after Emma Caldwell's death, Asheville was drowning in grief. And through it all, no one knew why she had died. But then, something strange happened. Two of Emma's closest friends, Eva Carter and Joseph Lane, vanished. Not in the way Emma had. Their bodies weren't found in a pool or abandoned in some dark corner of town. But overnight, they were gone, both kids withdrawn from the school, their families packing up and leaving with little explanation. At first, people assumed it was grief. The kind of trauma that makes teenagers want to run away from the memories of a lost friend. Maybe they couldn't bear to walk past Emma's locker every morning or sit through class pretending everything was normal. But Emma's parents, Daniel and Maria Caldwell, weren't convinced. Something felt wrong. They had known Eva and Joseph for years. They had spent countless afternoons at their house, studying, laughing, helping Emma. If they were struggling, why would they abandon their friends' memories? And why did both of them leave at the same time? Maria revealed that when she finally called Eva's mother, all the woman said was, "It's for the best. Please, just let it go." Maria couldn't let it go. Neither could Daniel. Their daughter was dead, and now her best friends had vanished. Someone knew something, and they were going to find out what. First, they went to Eva's house. Her parents were polite but distant. "We don't know anything," Eva's father said. Eva just needed a fresh start. Joseph's parents were the same. His mother wouldn't even open the door. Something was wrong. And then, the strangest part of all, when Maria finally found Eva and Joseph, when she confronted them face to face, the kids wouldn't say a word. They simply cried. Eva, who had once been fearless, just stared at the floor, her hands shaking. "We don't know anything," Eva whispered. "Please stop asking." That was when Maria realized they were terrified. Not just sad. Not just mourning. Terrified. It took another 2 weeks for the truth to come out. At first, Maria thought Emma had somehow been killed by her 2 best friends. After all, teenage violence wasn't unheard of. She was about to press charges against Eva and Joseph. After all, they were closest to Emma and they should have known what happened to her. And as it turned out, Maria Caldwell wasn't wrong. Eva and Joseph both knew about their friend's murder. But they had no hand in it. When the truth finally unraveled, it was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. 2 men. Not classmates. Not bullies. 2 fully grown men. Men who had taken an oath to protect the innocent. Men who wore badges. Law enforcement officers. Emma hadn't drowned by accident. She had been murdered. Brutalized. Betrayed. Violated. Raped. Beaten and left to drown. All in the hands of 2 police officers who had sworn to uphold the law. Mark Reynolds and Sergeant Brian Keaton, 2 respected members of the police. They had families. They had careers. They had power. And that night, at the school junior prom, they had been there. At first, no one knew why. Neither of them had children at the school. Neither had any reason to be at a school dance. But they had been there. The autopsy report on Emma's body revealed horrifying details, details that made the tragedy even more unbearable. She had not died immediately after being thrown into the pool. Instead, forensic experts detailed that she had been alive for hours, fighting against the cold, dark water. Rigor mortis had not yet fully set in, and her body showed clear signs of prolonged struggle. Emma had been a fighter. Even though she was blind, even though she had barely any vision left, she had refused to give up. The evidence suggested that she had thrashed against the water, trying desperately to stay afloat, clinging to life in the freezing pool. But her body had been battered, deep bruises, signs of blunt force trauma, and fractures along her ribs and spine. There were also disturbing indications of sexual assault. She was forcefully taken by both men, their residues were found inside her, further confirming the horror she had endured before her death. It was estimated that she had finally succumbed to exhaustion just 3 hours before she was found. That meant she had spent nearly the entire night suffering in that pool, trapped between life and death, struggling for air, until the moment her body could take no more. Emma had been raped. She had been beaten. Her bones had been broken. And then, as if that brutality wasn't enough, she had been thrown into the pool and left to drown. The news spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the town. Emma's parents were inconsolable. Her mother, once a strong and dignified woman, collapsed in grief, unable to process how her bright, beautiful, kind-hearted daughter had suffered so much. She didn't just die. She suffered. They wanted to hurt her, they wanted to make her suffer, Maria cried out. The town had taken the one good thing in their lives. And they would never forgive it. For almost a month, the town of Asheville had been searching for answers. The brutal murder of 14-year-old Emma Caldwell had shaken the community to its core, leaving parents terrified, students haunted, and the police force scrambling to close in on the truth. The breakthrough came when law enforcement finally managed to interrogate Eva and Joseph properly. At first, the kids had refused to talk. But when detectives showed them a single photograph, Emma's body, bloated and lifeless in the school pool, Joseph broke down first. And once he started talking, the truth spilled out like a dam breaking. Eva was shaking as she spoke. Emma was with us that night, she whispered. We were at prom, and she had this toy gun in her bag. It was plastic. She just thought it was funny. She put on these dark glasses, pretending to be some undercover agent. She'd go around the party waving it, grinning like some secret agent on a mission. I told her we should take the prank outside, Joseph admitted. It was just a joke. We weren't trying to scare anyone, just mess around a little. But that was when everything changed. As they stood there, still laughing, two police officers pulled up in an unmarked car. Officer Mark Reynolds and Sergeant Brian Keaton. At first, it seemed like a normal police stop. They asked us what we were doing outside, Joseph said, his hands trembling. Emma was still laughing, and she said, "We're robbing." But she was joking. It was just a stupid joke. Eva explained what had happened fearfully. I immediately said it was just a toy gun, she whispered. I told them it wasn't real. But Emma, she thought it was funny. She pulled the gun out of her bag and pointed it at the officers, making a pew-pew sound, like it was some kind of spy movie. We thought it was funny. But the officers didn't. Within seconds, everything went south. Reynolds and Keaton grabbed the gun from Emma's hands. They took it from her, Joseph whispered. They knew it was fake. They had it in their hands. But before we knew what was happening, they were grabbing her. Dragging her to their van. Eva began to sob. We screamed, she admitted. We begged them to stop. We kept saying it was a joke, that she didn't do anything wrong. But they just looked at us and said, "Get back to the party. Unless you want to be next." They had no choice. They watched helplessly as the officers threw Emma into their van, slamming the door shut. And then they drove away. Leaving Eva and Joseph standing in the dark, terrified, helpless, unable to stop the nightmare that had just begun. They expected the officers to return her to the school, maybe call her parents, maybe even arrest her for the prank. But Emma never came back. The next morning, they found out why. Her body was discovered in the school pool, floating face down. Her prom dress soaked, her hair tangled, her blind eyes staring into nothing. That was when the officers showed up at their homes. They threatened us, Joseph whispered. They told us that if we said anything, we'd be charged. That the police would say we were carrying a weapon and that we killed Emma ourselves. That we'd go to prison. Eva wiped at her eyes furiously. I believed them, she said. I was so scared. I just thought that if I left, if I went away, maybe it would all just disappear. And so they did. Joseph's parents pulled him from school. Eva's family moved across town. They tried to forget. But it was Emma's parents who never gave up. They pushed and pushed until law enforcement finally agreed to interrogate the minors. When Reynolds and Keaton were arrested, Maria said she felt some sort of justice. The truth was simple. After violating and beating Emma, they believed she had died and they had panicked. They needed to get rid of her body, and the school was the safest place. After all, she'd been there all evening. In the dead of night, they had snuck onto campus, carried her to the pool, and thrown her in. Hoping that no one would ever connect the dots. But justice finally caught up with them. Reynolds and Keaton were charged with kidnapping, rape, and first-degree murder. And for the first time in months, Eva and Joseph could breathe again. But the truth came too late for Emma. She was gone. And no matter how much justice was served, it would never bring her back. So many questions are left unanswered. How did two grown-up men in their prime think a 14-year-old could ever be a threat? Did this have anything to do with the gun at all? How had this ended in rape? How could two men decide to end the life of a helpless blind girl in one night just to satisfy their dark desires? Maimed, raped, beaten, humiliated and left to die a cold death. After 3 weeks, the monsters had been unmasked. Reynolds pleaded guilty but Keaton insisted he was innocent and it had been self-defense. But for Emma's parents, for Eva and Joseph, for everyone who had loved her, justice wasn't enough. Nothing would ever bring Emma back. Nothing would erase the horror of what had happened to her. One thing was certain, the town of Asheville would never forget the horrific tale of two officers that ended the life of an innocent girl they were meant to protect. Emma Caldwell, may you find light and peace where you are.